So the Big 12 is saved. I have talked to you a lot about the financial issues that are going to face this conference moving forward with revenue sharing. The biggest issue with revenue sharing is Big 12 schools cannot afford to pay the $22 million maximum to student athletes. Jamie Pollard, the athletic director at Iowa State, who's been cutting current projects to build up new facilities, says, hey, I'm not sure if we have enough money to allocate this right now every single year to our athletes. But something's changed. You've probably seen Immaculate on this show multiple times, and he sent me a tweet by Ross Dellinger that completely encompasses the hope the Big 12 can have, and that is NCAA President Charlie Baker and conference commissioners aren't the only ones on the Hill encouraging Congress to pass anti-employment legislation. So let's back it up just a bit. The NCAA has gone to the United States government and said, we cannot keep doing that. We cannot keep moving in this direction. And Ross Dellinger has been right on top of all of this in giving, and I'll put it in Immaculate's words. He says, excellent reporting by Ross Dellinger. Pretty much assumed this was happening to some degree, but here it is, proof positive. The National Collegiate Athletics Association is telling the government, hey, we shouldn't have to make student athletes employees. We shouldn't be having these guys on a W-2, on a 1099, filing taxes at the end of the year as somebody who you play for Alabama, you play for Kansas State, you play for Texas Tech. You don't work for them as an employee who is also the backup left tackle on the football team. And again, it's not just Charlie Baker, the NCAA, and the conference commissioners who are begging the U.S. government to change this. It's Cody Shimp, hell of a name, says on his LinkedIn, and Dellinger shared this, great time down on Capitol Hill this week. You're going, who's Cody Shimp? Well, that's the D1 Student Athlete Advisory Committee Chair. D1 Student Athlete Advisory Committee Chair. Cody Shimp, again on the Hill, who said that meeting with legislators about the collegiate athletics landscape was a great time, and the need for congressional intervention is now on employment and NIL. We informed them on critical need to maintain the non-employee status of student athletes, protections for NIL rights, and nationwide uniform rules around NIL. It's tough in an election year and in today's political climate, but hopefully we move the needle towards progress. Ross Dellinger follows it up with this tweet. NIL collective leaders were in D.C. this week as well, continuing to encourage lawmakers against passing legislation that grants NCAA protections. Charlie Baker was in D.C. this week too. NCAA and power leagues are lobbying Congress to codify House settlement terms. So in essence, NIL folks who are big-time moneymakers. I almost worked for an NIL firm when I was in college. Because there was so much money in it, right? This kid signs a $2 million contract and I get 10% of that. That's $200,000. A lot of these contracts, a lot of these big NIL moneymakers are also moneymakers for the brokers that help pull athletes into this era. So those people are currently at the United States government saying, hey, let us keep this wild west of NIL. Whereas commissioners, the NCAA president, and even the NCAA Student Advisory Council chairman are saying, hey, wait a second. Let's regulate NIL, which you, me, the general person who loves college football has said, let's regulate NIL. It can't continue to be the Wild West as it has been. And the other part of their rhetoric is do not make student athletes employees of their university. It feels like, I haven't always agreed. I have not always agreed with my dad's take. My dad's got the old school take of don't pay the athletes, don't pay them NIL. He was a guy who got a half scholarship to the University of Arkansas, went and played linebacker at Missouri State instead. And he never wanted to get paid. He got paid in education. He got to go play college football at the next level and do what he loves to do. And a lot of you will probably have a similar mindset of, hey, there's a blessing and an honor and a per diem and nicer housing, and you get your own personal chef and nutritionist and travel and all of that, the exposure that comes with being a college athlete. Now, I'm not completely on board with them not getting, like, you cannot argue, you can't sit here and argue that they can't get a chunk, a piece of the billions and billions and billions of dollars that are made up by college athletics. They're the ones that are making the coaches aren't the ones that are making, like, they get paid $7 million, but they're not the reason. They're not the reason these teams are winning. The ones that execute the game plan, the athletes are. The old rich president who sits at the top of the university or athletic director, that guy, that girl, they kind of move the chess pieces around, but they're not the ones suffering the CTE and fighting it out in the middle of the football field and trying to build up this the pomp and circumstance for the university and getting TV money in return. They're not. The athletes are. The employees are. What has happened in college football for the last 150 years, or what, at 152, they had those decals a couple years ago, is the people who were actually the employees were not getting the money. The ones who actually did the work were not getting the money, and the ones who facilitated did. Do I think that warrants $22 million a year to athletic programs? Do I think that warrants NIL being just this wild west? No. There has to be regulations on that. There are labor laws. There are labor laws in any labor situation in the United States of America. Why wouldn't there be here? Why is NIL not regulated somehow? Should the United States government regulate it? I don't think so, because nothing's ever bipartisan. Which part are we going to? Are the Republicans going to regulate NIL? Are the Democrats going to regulate NIL? That might seem like a wild question that's stupid, but no, legitimately, we have to decide who in the U.S. government, who eventually is going to have complete power and control over the future of name, image, and likeness. Who in the government is going to have control over how student athletes are paid? The reason this helps the Big 12 is if you can't afford that $22 million price tag and the U.S. government says, hey, you don't have to pay it, the students shouldn't be employees, then the Big 12 can move forward. The schools that couldn't afford it get to breathe a sigh of relief and you're okay. There is some good in that. There's some good in that when Cincinnati looks around and says, oof, our budget was almost completely slammed, but instead we got to stay alive. And when Cincinnati says that, Iowa State says that, and Houston says that. There are schools that need a break because $22 million is a huge price tag. And if Charlie Baker and the commissioners if they're right, if they're able to sway people in D.C., then the future of the Big 12 looks a little bit more sturdy when teams aren't having to dole that kind of cash out. Coming up, will Colorado win the Big 12? Joel Klatt said it's possible. This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where I go for the NBA Finals. Look, the NBA Finals are on right now. And I love watching them because I can go to FanDuel and say, I think the Boston Celtics or the Dallas Mavericks are going to win the series. I like watching the NHL too, the Edmonton Oilers and the Florida Panthers, and I can bet on that at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to win big. Bring home the big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. You go today, you bet on the Celtics, you bet on the Mavericks, you can bet on the Panthers or the Oilers or whichever sport you watch, or go bet on the Boston Red Sox if that's what you're into. All of that and more at FanDuel.com/locked on, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.